Kentucky is a place of rolling hills and quiet towns where stories travel down long stretches of back roads. But tucked between the ridgelines and river valleys are cases that never found their way home. There are disappearances with no explanation, crimes without answers, and families who've spent decades living inside a question mark. Tonight, we're stepping into the Bluegrass State's darkest corners, from an abduction witnessed through a telescope, to a 7-year-old taken from outside her apartment, to cars abandoned in remote mountains, and people who simply vanished mid-sentence. These are the mysteries that refuse to fade. This is 12 Unsolved, Kentucky. Welcome to, or welcome back to, the Agatha Mae Detective Agency. I'm Agatha Mae, and I'm so glad you've joined me for another episode of 12 Unsolved. Let me apologize for the way I sound. The only reason I sound gross is because I feel gross. But if you enjoy true crime explored with common sense, snark, and wit that might not be razor sharp, but is at least a step or two above a butter knife, then hit the subscribe button and make sure you select all notifications so you'll know when a new episode drops. We start our look at 12 of Kentucky's unsolved cases in the autumn of 1963. October 12, 1963 was a crisp, cool autumn morning when 44-year-old Barbara Nellie Lunsford stepped out of her home near the crossroads of Short Street and Georgetown Street in Lexington, Kentucky. Barbara was headed to a doctor's appointment at the University of Kentucky Medical Center. Investigators believe she likely boarded a local bus to get there, but somewhere between her doorstop and the hospital, Barbara vanished. She never arrived for her appointment and was never seen again. 3 months later, on January 17th, authorities carried out a search across the Lexington area, hoping to find even the smallest trace of Barbara's route or her fate. Whatever was uncovered, if there was anything at all, was never publicly released. More than 60 years have passed since Barbara Lunsford walked out into the October air and disappeared. Her case remains unsolved, held quietly in cold case files. When her son died in 2010, his obituary listed both of his parents as deceased, a final silent acknowledgement of a mystery that has never been answered. If you have any information about Barbara's case, please contact the Lexington Police Department at 859-258-3600. On November 1st, 1966, Juanita Ritchie walked out of her home in the tiny mountain community of Dwarf, Kentucky. She was only headed to the grocery store, but she never made it back home. By the time her family reported her missing about a week later, whatever might have been discovered in those first crucial days was already slipping away. According to her relatives, no real investigation ever took place. Then, to add insult to injury, the missing persons report and all the information tied to it was later lost by law enforcement. Decades later, in the early 1990s, a man came forward with a written statement claiming that another individual had confessed to killing Juanita during an attempted sexual assault. However, that lead went nowhere. Then, in 2012, Juanita's brother received a blocked call with an alarming tip. Her body, the caller said, was lying at the bottom of a well in Rowdy, Kentucky. Police pumped the well and found nothing. They deemed it too dangerous to send anyone inside. But her brother arranged for it to be pumped a second time. But again, no sign of Juanita was ever found, nor any evidence that she'd ever been in the well. Juanita's social security number has never been used since the day she vanished. Nearly 60 years later, the quiet consensus is that she met with foul play. If you have any information about her disappearance, please contact the Kentucky State Police at 606-435-6069. On January 15th, 1994, 21-year-old Joel Wells was out in Hazard, Kentucky, spending the evening with friends. At some point, their plans took a turn. According to later statements, the group intended to steal from Walmart, return the items for cash, and then use the money to buy alcohol. Joel didn't want any part of it, though. He argued with his friends and walked away into the cold winter night. He ended up at the Burger King in the Black Gold Shopping Center, banging on the doors as the staff was closing up. Workers later said he looked terrified and was making odd expressions, acting like someone was chasing him. They called the police immediately, but in the few minutes it took officers to arrive, Joel had already vanished into the dark, cold night. Witnesses reported seeing him trying to flag down customers leaving nearby Walmart. Search dogs eventually picked up his scent behind City Hall near the river, but no sign of Joel was ever discovered. Joel was one of 14 siblings and a father to two young sons. He walked away from his friends that night and just never came home. More than 3 decades later, his case is still open. If you have any information about Joel's disappearance, please contact the Hazard Police Department at 606-436-2222. On the morning of June 29, 1995, 31-year-old Lois McCain was found dead in the bathtub of her Madison Street apartment in Paducah, Kentucky. She had been strangled and drowned. Investigators determined that she had been killed sometime in the early morning hours while she was home alone with her two young children. Lois's babysitter was expecting her to drop off the kids around 8 that morning, and when Lois failed to show up, the babysitter went to check on her. But instead of a normal morning routine, she walked into a crime scene. Neighbors later told investigators that around 1 a.m., they had heard a heavy thud from Lois's bathroom, followed by the sound of someone running down the stairs and out the door. Whoever it was disappeared into the night and left no traceable trail. Despite interviews, tips, and time, no suspect has ever been identified. Nearly 3 decades later, Lois McCain's murder remains unsolved. If you have any information about her case, please contact the Paducah Police Department at 270-444-8550. On August 26, 1995, 23-year-old Heather Teague was sunbathing at Newburgh Beach in Henderson County, Kentucky, enjoying a warm, sunny summer afternoon. Across the Ohio River on the Indiana side, a man named Tim Walthall happened to be watching that beach through a telescope around 12:45 that afternoon. He watched as a man walked up to Heather. The stranger was about 6 feet tall, 225 pounds, had brown hair, a thick beard, was wearing jeans with no shirt, and bizarrely appeared to be wearing both a wig and a mosquito net. According to Tim, the man grabbed Heather by the hair at gunpoint and dragged her into the woods just off the beach. She was never seen again. When investigators searched the area later that day, they found a piece of Heather's bathing suit near the spot where she was taken, along with other bits of evidence. None of it pointed to where she was taken or whether she was still alive. Over the years, multiple suspects surfaced, but every lead collapsed under its own weight. One of the strongest suspects was Marty Dill, who died before authorities could fully question him. In August of this year, Dill's remains were exhumed in the hope of comparing his DNA to the scrap of Heather's swimsuit that was recovered at the scene. And investigators are still waiting on the results of those tests. If you have any information about Heather's disappearance, please contact the Kentucky State Police at 270-826-3312. On July 24, 1996, 7-year-old Morgan Violi was spending a hot summer afternoon playing outside her Bowling Green apartment building with a friend. The two girls were crossing the parking lot of the apartments when a maroon Chevy van suddenly pulled up beside them. Morgan's friend froze as the driver jumped out and lunged at the girls. He tried to grab her first, but she managed to break free and run. But when she looked back, the man had already grabbed Morgan, shoved her into the passenger seat, climbed over her into the driver's seat, and sped away. The kidnapping happened in seconds. The van had been stolen the day before out of Dayton, Ohio. 2 days after the abduction, it turned up abandoned at a truck stop in Franklin, Tennessee. Witnesses described the suspect as a white male in his 20s with collar-length, sandy brown hair, a slender but muscular build, a mustache, and some beard growth. And the one unmistakable feature that everyone remembered was that he had a sharp, distinct nose. The investigation later uncovered that the day after Morgan was taken, a second vehicle, an older white Ford van with a glass louvered side window, was spotted parked near an old barn on North Swift Road at Webster Road in Robertson County. It sat there for about 4 hours. That spot was roughly around 100 feet from where Morgan's remains were later found on October 20th, 1996. Nearly 3 decades later, whoever took Morgan that July afternoon has never been identified. Her case remains open and is one of Kentucky's most haunting child abductions and murder. If you have any information about her case, please contact the Bowling Green Police Department at 270-393-4244. October 21st, 1998 was a cool autumn evening in Brookville, Kentucky, and 17-year-old Erica Frazier was spending it with friends. Her last confirmed stop was at the video and tan store, but no one saw her after that. The following day, Erica's black four-door Pontiac Bonneville was found abandoned in a field about a mile from the store. It was sitting unlocked between bales of hay. Her personal belongings, her purse, wallet, money, and checkbook, were still in her car and appeared to have been untouched. Erica's keys were missing, though, at least for a little while. They were later found across the road, buried under leaves as if tossed or dropped in a hurry. But there was no other evidence of what happened to Erica. There were no fingerprints in the car other than hers and no signs of foul play. Investigators followed leads and looked hard at several suspects over the years, but nothing ever reached the level of an arrest. If you have any information about Erica's disappearance, please contact the Bracken County Sheriff's Office at 606-735-2700. On April 2nd, 1997, 18-year-old Kevin Gilpin was dropped off by his father at a local pool hall in Campbellsville, Kentucky. It should have been just another ordinary night out, but instead, it was the last time that anyone saw Kevin alive. When his family reported him missing, little was done, and the case stalled before it ever really had a chance to move forward. 6 years passed. In 2003, a family working on their newly purchased farm in Casey County hired crews to clear out an old unused well on the property. On June 18th, workers reached the bottom of the well and found skeletal remains hidden under 2 sacks of rocks. A cinder block with a rope attached was found nearby, as if someone had tried to weigh down the body to keep it from being discovered. DNA testing later confirmed what Kevin's family had feared for years. The remains were his. Decades later, Kevin's murder still remains unsolved, and no suspects have ever been named. And I wonder what evidence was lost in those early days when law enforcement failed to investigate his disappearance. If you have any information about Kevin's case, please contact the Kentucky State Police at 800-222-5555. On January 31st, 2006, Christopher Gregory left a friend's house in Russell Springs, Kentucky, and was headed to meet another friend at Key Village. He was last seen around 9:30 p.m., driving his green Pontiac Grand Am, but he was never seen again. Somewhere between his friend's home and the next destination, Christopher disappeared. Later that same night, his car was found abandoned in the parking lot of a bowling alley near Lakeway Drive and US 127, which was close to where he'd last been seen. But there were no clues about where he went or why he left the car behind. 2 months later, in March, searchers found his driver's license and several personal documents scattered on the side of a road in Jamestown. A search of the surrounding area failed to turn up anything else, though. There were no footprints or clothing, no sign that Christopher had ever been there beyond the items that someone left behind. Rumors have swirled for years that he was taken at gunpoint, that drugs played a role, that people in the community knew exactly what happened but never came forward. Investigators believe as many as 4 individuals were directly involved in his disappearance, and at least 6 others know the truth. But without evidence, no one has ever been charged. If you know anything about Christopher's disappearance, please contact the Russell Springs Police Department at 270-866-3636. On May 27, 2007, 27-year-old Travis Wilson was staying at his father's house in Middleton, Kentucky. His father last saw him asleep in the den in the early morning hours, but when he went back later that morning to check on him, Travis was gone along with his car. Travis had a doctor's appointment that day but never showed for it. 3 weeks later, his car was discovered miles away in Bell County, sitting abandoned on a remote access road. One tire was flat, and someone had pulled out the jack and started to change it, but the job was never finished. There was nothing at the scene to indicate what had happened to Travis. There haven't been any leads in his case, and no suspects have ever been named. If you have any information about Travis's disappearance, please contact the Middleton Police Department at 606-248-3636. On a cool March morning in 2009, Crystal Hall was alone in her Pikeville, Kentucky apartment, talking on the phone to a friend. In the middle of the conversation, Crystal said someone was coming in the back door. Those were her final words. The call ended, and she was never heard from again. But who was the person who hung up the phone? When people checked on Crystal the next day, her purse, coat, and all her belongings were still inside the apartment. Nothing suggested she'd stepped out voluntarily. Crystal had been wearing dark button-pocket blue jeans, a red hooded long-sleeve shirt, brown slip-on shoes, and large hoop earrings the night she vanished. Crystal had struggled with addiction, and her grandmother had custody of two of her children at Crystal's own request. Despite her challenges, she called her children every day, and her grandmother doesn't believe that Crystal would have ever abandoned them. Over the months that followed, authorities chased multiple reported sightings, but none were ever confirmed. Crystal's grandmother believes she's no longer alive. If you have any information about Crystal's disappearance, please contact the Kentucky State Police at 606-433-7711. Just after midnight on March 28, 2017, Carrie Burgett left her house with her boyfriend. Carrie lived with her parents and told them she'd be back in time to get her children ready for school in the morning. That promise was the last thing they ever heard from her. Carrie never returned home. Her boyfriend's sister told the family that Carrie had left in the middle of the night with someone they didn't know and that they had no idea where she went. What troubled her family even more was what didn't happen, and that was her boyfriend never called them to ask if Carrie had come home or if they'd ever heard from her. I wasn't able to find the name of the boyfriend, and I couldn't find any evidence that he'd ever been named a suspect in Carrie's disappearance, but I hope he was thoroughly investigated. No other evidence or leads have been discovered, and Carrie's disappearance has as many questions now as it did 8 years ago. If you have any information about her case, please contact the Morgan County Sheriff's Department at 606-743-3613. These are just 12 of many unsolved cases that Kentucky still carries. The years stretch out and evidence grows cold, but someone out there still holds a missing puzzle piece. If you know something, even if it feels small or odd, please say it. Justice doesn't expire, and neither does a family's need for answers. Up next on 12 Unsolved, we're heading to the swamps and the bayous of Louisiana, where the Spanish moss carries yesterday's secrets, and dark tales are buried under the thick roots of live oaks. I'll be back soon with more true crime. Until then, stay safe and be happy.